A young boy was reincarnated into a fantasy world known as Asfile, a kingdom full of wonders beyond imagination. In this magical land, dragons flew through the skies, adventurers faced each other in epic battles, and spells were cast like scenes from a fairy tale. That's all the kid ever dreamed of in his childhood. His new life in that extraordinary world had just begun, or so he believed. Despite the enchanting landscapes, Asfile lacked the comforts he once considered guaranteed. There were no baths, no proper meals, and certainly no electricity. Civilization seemed out of the Middle Age, far away from the convenience of the modern world he had left behind. While lying in bed, disappointment took over. What he once thought was a paradise was beginning to look like a degradation. Our guy went to give the world isekai and realized too late that it wasn't equipped with plumbing. He turned his eyes to the bright moon out there, wishing for the freedom to move between the worlds at will. At that moment, a portal materialized before him, spinning with mysterious energy. The boy was fascinated, realizing the awakening of a deep power within him. It was the Lunar Gate, dimensional travel, your unique skill. With it, he could cross countless worlds, each with his own rules and wonders. He traveled through lands dominated by dinosaurs, others ruled by futuristic machines and kingdoms beyond human understanding. Eventually, he saw himself standing in a place that looked familiar. Japan. Now he was a young man. And it's been over a decade since you last saw him. You never thought I'd come back. Just then, an elderly man noticed him and approached him, curious about the presence of the stranger. Surprised, the young man struggled to explain himself instead. The man extended a lunch offer. During the meal, the young man was overcome by an overwhelming emotion. He hadn't tasted soba in years, and the simple dish moved him to tears. That's when the man made an observation. The young man, although clearly not Japanese, spoke with a perfect accent. Confused, the boy looked into a nearby mirror and was surprised by a reflection that was no longer his own. Golden hair, green eyes, a strange face he remembered. At some point, his appearance had changed, but his speech remained fluent. He suspected that this was another effect of his ability. From that moment on, the boy began to travel frequently between worlds. A breakthrough stood out. No living thing but him could pass through the moon gate. However, inanimate objects could. This perception opened a door to possibilities far beyond mere exploration. He saw opportunity in the differences between the two worlds. In Japan, a nugget of gold could buy a mansion. In Asfile, she barely matched a month's salary. On the other hand, spices and sweets had immense value in Asfile. A single luxury cake could be worth the price of a house. With that in mind, the young man began to imagine a new purpose, not as adventurous anymore, but as a merchant among worlds. He would bring goods from Japan to Asfile, and in doing so would create a fortune. Life in Asfile may lack convenience, but with the right strategy, he could pay for all the comfort he wanted, even a trip to a real thermal bath. One day, an old woman approached the young man and thanked him for his help, observing how much the elderly in the village appreciated his kindness. As a symbol of gratitude, she gave him some money. He accepted him with sincere appreciation, even declaring with joy that he would spend everything on sweets. The woman was fun and surprised, asking if he really liked candy so much. The young man proudly confirmed, before politely saying goodbye. Of course, he couldn't admit he was planning to resell the value of money in another world, so he didn't say anything else. Now it was time to begin your journey as a merchant. Later, the young man, whose name was Alan, returned to Asfile. He delivered a piece of chocolate to a local merchant named Albert. Curious, Albert asked where Alan had gotten that treat. But Alan remained vacant, and instead asked if the nobles might be interested in buying it. Albert replied that the nobles would certainly be interested, and that many would be delighted with such a luxurious set. It was evident that Alan was seeking Albert's help, and although he had admitted that he had no direct ties to the nobility, he suggested that he might be able to connect Alan to someone who had such contacts. Still, something seemed to worry Albert. Alan realized and asked if there was any problem, specifically if selling to nobles could be a question. Albert explained the risks. Going directly to the nobles could attract all sorts of unwanted attention. Other traders may not welcome someone who ignores the usual networks. In noble society, sweets weren't just pampering. They were symbols of power, gifts, political maneuvers, and signs of wealth. As a result, traders often organized themselves, managing farmers and pastry shops collectively. Violating these unwritten agreements could result in retaliation. But Alan, without realizing the full picture, just commented that Albert's shop was small because of his fear of these merchants. The observation displeased Albert, although he acknowledged that Alan was not completely wrong. A merchant of lesser expression, as he could never compete equal to equal with those who served the elite. Albert, in fact, feared the candy cartel. Finally, Albert told Alan that he would have to find another trader if he wanted to sell chocolates. Though somewhat disappointed, Alan respected the decision. But he wouldn't give up completely, just change his strategy. I already had another product in mind. Albert, on the other hand, was surprised by Alan's unwavering enthusiasm for sale. Alan explained that he only wanted Albert's professional opinion. Before they could continue, two mothers entered the store, delighted to see them. Alan greeted them casually and asked if they were shopping. One of the mothers was surprised to see him there and quickly showed interest in the object he held, asking what it was. Alan simply said it was exotic sweets he had found. The girl then asked if he intended to become a merchant, to which he replied that he was only curious about trade. Albert, when he realized that this was the ideal time to test the attractiveness of the product, he encouraged Alan to let the mothers try the sweets. Alan hesitated, worried about revealing too much, but Albert seemed calm. A lack of caution that, in Alan's mind, explained why Albert's shop remained small. Alan gave the sweets to the mothers, who accepted them enthusiastically. As expected, they found it delicious and immediately wanted to buy more. Before leaving, they promised to release the product, which left Alan both excited and slightly pressed. Turning to Albert, Alan seemed apologetic for promoting his product inside someone else's store. But Albert wasn't impressed. I told Alan directly so he could do business elsewhere. At that moment, Alan realized that all his products had been sold. Albert considered it a reasonable result, but Alan paid little attention to it, believing that success was due to the mothers who helped. Still, he couldn't shake the idea that if only the chocolates had been sold, he might now be sitting on a small fortune. The potential value corroded him, an acute reminder of what might have been. Albert, always standing on the ground, alerted mentally against underestimating trade. Alan, recognizing the support he received, thanked him before he left. So you left behind the chocolates, not sold as a show of gratitude. Although Albert tried to stop him, Alan followed his path, leaving Albert thinking that perhaps the young man had more potential in this field than he had originally thought. Later that day, Alan went to a bathroom. Warm water was a rare comfort, a momentary escape from the uncertainties that plagued him. Without an identity registered in Asfile, their options remained limited. He couldn't rent a place to stay, keep a steady job, or get out of this cycle of poverty. However, even with all this weighing on him, the bath lifted his spirit. In this brief moment of relaxation, a new hope arose. Selling candy didn't make him a rich man, but it confirmed something vital. Japanese products had value in this world. The challenge now was to find out what to sell and how to navigate the unknown market. The merchants here operated under their own systems, bound by rules he still did not understand. There was still a lot to learn. Later, he met at a local bar. The drink served there was surprisingly good, adding to the small luxuries of the day. Soon after the visit to the Turkish bath, the drink seemed deserved. But soon, the atmosphere changed. The noise silenced as the silence took over the room. A group of girls came in, getting everyone's attention. The sudden change in climate was undeniable. Whispers roamed the crowd, identifying one of them as the Black Princess. His presence in the city was a shock to the frequenters. Alan, watching from his seat, began to wonder. She was like him. A transfer that might be from Japan. Someone capable of moving between worlds. So she's the Black Princess? But is she Japanese? In Asfile, individuals with unusual origins were not as rare as could be expected. Every city had at least one or two of these people, those born in this world. But still holding memories of a past life, were called reincarnated. Those who emerged from a completely different world were referred to as transferred. Both types often had improved physical or magical abilities, and many received blessings called skills. As a result, they often became adventurers, researchers, or merchants specialized in magical disciplines. This was Alan's first time meeting someone who shared his circumstances. Around him, whispers continued. The Black Princess, despite the rumors, was much prettier than many expected. She led the Red Moon Brigade, a group of exclusively female adventurers. It wasn't just flashy. She was known to defeat powerful monsters and gain the trust of influential nobles and merchants. Still, for Alan, seeing her personally did not arouse admiration, but rather intimidation. Soon after, Alan got up to ask for the bill. The owner was surprised that he was leaving so early. Since it was unusual for him to have just one drink, Alan just smiled, explaining that something had happened. Later, Alan made a trip back to Japan to stock up on supplies. One of his main purchases was a set of mangas. At the store, he trusted the cashier's guidance, Kida, to confirm which titles were currently on the rise. Alan was not up to date with the latest releases, but Kida, being a manga enthusiast as well, helped him choose the best title of the weekly shonen campaign. Besides the manga, Alan also picked up a women's fashion magazine. When asked about her, she claimed someone asked her to pick her up. After paying, he left the store quickly. Actually, it was different. No one had asked you for anything. Approaching the princess directly black had seemed too risky at the time. But he strongly suspected she was a transferee, someone like him, and unlike the others, Asfile had little in terms of entertainment, so I hoped that these mangas could serve as a bridge. The purchase was expensive, especially for someone in your situation, and all you could do now was hope your risk was worth it. Back in Asfile, Alan followed to where he intended to deliver the mangas. But things didn't go as planned. The restaurant was closed to the public due to a private event, and its windows were completely curved. Rumor has it the Black Princess was inside. If he missed that chance, maybe there wouldn't be another. Leaving could make him look suspicious, but standing still might make the impression worse. While he was hesitating, one of the Red Moon Brigade girls noticed. She saw him standing by the entrance and confronted him, taking this opportunity. Alan explained that he had something to deliver to the Black Princess. He gave him the manga, emphasizing it was a free gift. If she didn't need it, she could just throw it away. Without expecting reaction, Alan quickly quit. Despite the confusion, the girl decided to take the package inside the restaurant. Another member of the Red Moon Brigade, Kalkira, called the girl outside, Aina, asking what the item was. When I heard it came from some stranger out there to the Black Princess. Kalkira inspected carefully, after confirming, who was not poisoned or equipped with any kind of dangerous magic. Aina gave him to the Black Princess. Upon receiving the package, the Black Princess showed hesitation, undecided whether to open it. Aina, who had delivered him, offered peace of mind, mentioning that the person who delivered him said that he could discard him if he was not interested. With that, the Black Princess opened the package. Inside, there were several books. At first glance, Aina found them common in appearance, but her presence was certainly unusual. She could not understand why these items were specifically addressed to her captain. Then, without warning, the Black Princess asked frantically who had given the package. Hours earlier, she simply waited to be picked up at school, but in an instant, her surroundings changed. Without warning, she was pulled into another world. Before he could understand what was going on, he fell into an abyss. As darkness approached, she surrendered to her destiny, her final thoughts wandering to her father. But death never came. Instead, she woke up in an unknown world. Next to her, there was a couple, relieved to see her regain consciousness. Alarmed, she questioned who those strangers were. Realizing her concern, the woman apologized gently and explained that they were the hosts of the site. They had found her passed out by a cliff. The Black Princess confirmed she actually fell. When she asked if they had saved her, they turned their praise away, saying that her survival was thanks to her own strength. Surviving a fall like this was, for them, something only a Miko could do. Still not understanding the term, she asked what Amiko was. The couple explained that Amiko were divine messengers, beings from another world, marked by traits like black hair and blessed with unknown powers. Although she still did not understand her own abilities, the signs were there, overburdened, admitted that nothing made sense. The woman then gave her a cup of hot tea, advising her to rest first and understand everything later. Following this advice, she drank the tea and slowly calmed her thought. When his strength returned, he expressed his gratitude and prepared to leave. The couple wished her well, and she rewarded the feeling. From that moment on, she embarked on her journey, determined to find a way back to her own world. With his powers as a Miko, he managed to travel safely, never in danger, even alone. But as stories of his presence spread, people began to gather around him. In time, the Blood Moon Brigade emerged, a group that loyally followed it. Looking back, she realized how lucky she was to have met such companions. They never asked her about her purpose. They simply believed her. She also hoped that someday she could tell them everything. At present, the Black Princess visited the pub where Alan had been. She approached him, asking if he was responsible for the mysterious package. Alan greeted her with a smile and asked Xian, the owner of the bar, to pour her a drink. As the bar approached closing hours, Xian reminded Alan to lock the door before leaving. They sat with a seat between them, the heavy silence. Alan broke the silence, admitting the awkward situation, but explaining that this conversation was best kept secret, something that only related souls shared. He asked if she was Japanese, and she confirmed, revealing that she was a reincarnated woman. When Alan asked her name, she performed as Shizuku Sayoji, who would be turning 18 that year. She then asked his name, and Alan responded with a more relaxed presentation, saying he was a 20-year-old without a job. Shizuku asked for Alan's name from his original world, to which he replied that his name was Masato Shinjo, an ordinary man who was 25 years old when he died. Although she apologized for asking such a personal question, Alan made sure that it was okay. Shizuku then realized something strange. Alan had not reacted to the name Sayoji. This suggested that the other transfers he had had contact with could have come from a totally different period. When Alan asked if she had been famous or perhaps even an idol, Shizuku realized that he really had no idea of his previous life. Alan kept speculating that they might have come from different timelines. Based on his own estimate, 20 years had passed since his death. However, the Japanese base, with its markedly aesthetics of the Showa era, did not seem to reflect this passing of time. At this moment, Shizuku's interest increased. She wanted to know more about his ability to return to Japan. She tried to push for details, but Alan quickly pushed the idea away. According to him, bringing another person alive through worlds was impossible. However, he could transfer objects and even deliver goods directly to her. He tried to lighten the mood by suggesting it wasn't such a bad deal. Shizuku did not respond, his heavy thoughts. Until Alan insisted she have another drink. Without a bartender around, Alan brought a bottle of tea from Japan. Although I wasn't sure if she'd like it, Shizuku accepted and took a sip. When Alan asked her opinion, she smiled and said it was delicious. Watching her, Alan was momentarily taken by how mature she seemed, and it was hard to believe she was only 18. Realizing her vulnerability, Shizuku apologized for showing such a vulnerable side of herself. Alan assured that there was no reason to be ashamed, admitting that he himself already cried for eating soba after reincarnating. Shizuku, unknown to the dish, aroused Alan's curiosity. He promised to bring her some the next time he returned to Japan. Although she was still waiting for a clue that could help her find her way home, this little solace was a welcome relief. At that moment, Shizuku offered to sponsor Alan. In return, she asked him to provide some specific items for her. Alan was surprised, but he agreed, warning her not to exaggerate, since he had no steady income or legal identity in this world. Shizuku responded by offering to write a letter on his behalf, so she asked if he was good at organizing documents. The next morning, Shizuku woke up early, awakening members of the Red Moon Brigade. She had an announcement to make. Alan would join them as his youngest member. Alan actually got into a guild, and by accident became part of a group of girls. The revelation caused an instant reaction. Aina, surprise, recognized him as the strange man the other day, and wondered if Shizuku really was serious. However, Shizuku confirmed his decision, saying clearly that he trusted him. Meanwhile, Alan was cautiously at the door, completely expecting such a reaction. As the room assimilated the news, one of the girls advanced to question Shizuku again, expressing concern about Alan being a man. Shizuku clarified that Alan would not accompany them in the field. Instead, he'd be working behind the scenes in charge of logistics. Without wasting time, she appointed Aina as Alan's coach, a line that immediately provoked protests from the reluctant girl. Later that day, the two met for the so-called training session. Aina, clearly still insecure, broke the silence with a question. She asked how Alan managed to capture the captain's interest. Noting that she had never seen Shizuku so enthusiastic before, Alan admitted it took some effort, but in the end, it worked, even if he didn't expect to join the brigade. Meanwhile, Aina could not help but reflect on how unusual the situation was. In all their history, no man had ever joined the Red Moon Brigade. Aina quickly left aside her previous doubts, commenting that additional force would be useful anyway. So Alan asked if she had really handled all the logistics on her own, and she confirmed, explaining that she and Shizuku were the only ones capable of reading and making basic calculations. The burden of the task began to weigh on Alan, knowing that managing supplies for more than 30 people was no easy task. Aina then presented the plan, She would handle the inventory checks while Alan was in charge of refueling. She also mentioned that the name of the Blood Moon Brigade alone should be sufficient to prevent traders from deceiving him unjustly. Before leaving, Alan reminded her not to burden herself. Later that day, Alan began his tasks, still unbelieving with what had happened. Initially, the plan was to become a merchant connected to the Blood Moon Brigade, someone who could negotiate freely with the nobles. Instead, he became one of them. Now that I was on the team, I knew I had to prove myself if I wanted to win the trust of the other members. Coming through Albert's shop, a group of known mothers called him, signaling him to approach. They didn't waste any time confirming the rumor about whether he really had joined the Blood Moon Brigade. Alan was surprised to realize that the news had already reached them. The mothers laughed, explaining that the rumor runs fast, and then asked if there was something going on between him and the Black Princess. Ashamed, Alan quickly denied, saying that she had been interested only in the goods he was selling. He was just an extra bonus. Still, the speed of rumors made him uncomfortable. One of the mothers commented how much she liked the sweets he brought last time, while another offered his congratulations and wished him luck in his new role. Alan responded with an embarrassed laugh, saying that for now, he was just doing errands. So one of the moms asked him to come to her store more often, promising her a discount. Impressed by the generous offer, Alan asked if she really meant it. After picking up some supplies, he realized how much he owed these women and quietly noticed to himself that he couldn't thank them enough. That's when you heard someone calling your name from the crowd. Turning around, he found himself surrounded by a small group of people, all excited to see him. The news had certainly spread quickly, and now several residents offered their support and even supplied. The unexpected wave of kindness has overwhelmed him, overpowered by the thrill of all that. Alan couldn't hold on and let out a joyful scream. Later that day, Ina thanked Alan for his help and asked if he had finished his shopping routine. Alan confirmed that he did and delivered the invoices, although he remained half hidden around the corner. Curious, Ina asked why he was acting so suspiciously, and Alan explained that he was just being cautious. When Ina heard about it, scanned the invoice, her expression changed instantly. Alarmed, Alan asked if he had extrapolated the budget in. But Ina quickly clarified that it was the opposite. The total cost was 20% lower than usual. Suspecting the unusually low price, she questioned whether Alan had done anything suspicious. Alan firmly denied, explaining that he simply received goodwill discounts from some acquaintances. He even told her to check with the merchants personally if she had any questions. Upon hearing this, Ina relaxed and said there was no need to question them as I walked towards the door. She turned with a smile, telling Alan that he had done a good job. Later, Alan returned to Japan with a letter from Shizuku. Looking at her, she couldn't help wondering if it would really make any difference. The Red Moon Brigade finally arrived in the royal capital, with Alan traveling alongside them. Shizuku recognized the effort of the group during the long journey and reported that Lineberg would now serve as his new base of operation. The team house had already been arranged, and everyone was instructed to find their rooms and settle in. As the group dispersed, Shizuku pulled Alan aside. She asked him to return to Japan as soon as he completed his current responsibilities. Alan didn't mind, but he asked if she needed anything specific. Shizuku answered vaguely. He said he didn't need supplies this time, and Alan would understand as soon as he got there. She explained nothing else, turning around without offering any more details. Before she really left, however, she reminded him to pick up the next volume of Dream Love, a manga she clearly loved. Later, Alan arrived in Japan. just to find the village in a state of agitation. The old man he had known earlier, Genji, greeted him warmly, commenting on how much time had passed. Curious, Alan asked about the meeting, and Genji explained that the people were from the Seoji group. Apparently, they'd been looking for Alan for over a week for Genji's mess, especially since Alan had never heard of them before. Seeing that there was no longer any point in hiding, Alan decided to approach the group. As he approached, he spotted a car, and a young woman sitting inside. She asked if he was Alan, and when she confirmed, she invited him into the car, commenting on how hot it was out there. Inside the vehicle, the unknown woman casually commented on the difficulty of finding him. He also complained about the lack of decent cigarettes in the region. Alan apologized, but soon realized he didn't even know her name. She introduced herself as Akira Kamiki, saying to call her Akira. When Alan asked if her search had anything to do with Shizuku's letter, Akira suddenly slammed the car door hard. His posture changed, and it became clear that Alan's response confirmed his suspicions. Without hesitation, Akira transmitted to her team, announcing that the target had been captured and requesting reinforcements. As the tension increased in the air, she warned Alan to cooperate if she wanted to remain unharmed. Her penetrating look and her cold words made it clear she wasn't bluffing, forced into submission. Alan had no choice but to accept what was to happen. During the course, he asked what this Seoji group really was. Akira explained, which was a huge corporate empire deeply rooted in the real estate market and other crucial sectors, both in Japan and abroad. It functioned as a powerful zaibatsu, and its origins referred to one of Kyoto's richest families. Under the leadership of Ryugen Sayoji, Shizuku's father had become a major conglomerate. Akira also revealed that her family, the Kamikis, served the Sayojis for generations. She herself has been with Shizuku since high school. But 3 years ago, coinciding with the beginning of her full-time position on the property, she began to realize that something was not right. There was a time when Akira served tea for Shizuku, and the girl praised her for it. Akira responded with the usual courtesy, but Shizuku reminded her not to be so formal when they were just the two. At that moment, Shizuku casually commented on the Dream Love anime and asked if Akira had recorded the latest episode, to which she replied yes. Shizuku then wondered if Akira planned to spend the night there, suggesting that they watch together. Fun, Akira agreed to the idea without protesting. But then, everything changed one day, while Akira waited for Shizuku to come home. Was confronted with the devastating news that Shizuku had disappeared. It was abrupt and disconcerting. Akira demanded answers, questioning the guards and how an absence like that could happen under her supervision. Denial filled his thoughts, convinced it had to be a mistake. But when they checked the surveillance systems, nothing unusual was found. Shizuku had disappeared without a trace. So far, the search has continued. Specialized teams were sent around the world, but each track led to a dead end. No leads and no advances. Akira turned to Alan, hoping he'd get the answers. They've finally reached their destination. Akira left the vehicle, offering an apology for her previous disappointment. And then he asked Alan to come to the point. When they entered the gigantic structure that stood before them, Alan was stunned. He had no idea that such an installation could exist near the quiet village of Akane. Soon after, Akira knocked on the door of an imposing office and announced her arrival at the president. Inside, Ryugen Sayoi, head of the Sayoji family, greeted Alan, recognizing him for the contents of a letter his daughter had written some time ago. Alan was immediately dominated by the presence of that man, wondering if all men of such status exhaled the same aura. Ryugen, however, quickly reassured him, saying that he knew Alan was not responsible for Shizuku's disappearance. The letter, written in a unique code, known only by the family, was proof that both the sender and the message were authentic. That meant Shizuku was still alive and trusted Alan. Curious, Alan asked how they had managed to locate him. Although he did not have a fixed address or job, Ryugen explained that the stamp on the letter had helped to restrict the search, and that the letter itself contained a detailed description of Alan. He then expressed admiration for him. As Akira had mentioned, Shizuku had disappeared 3 years ago, even though she was surrounded by dozens of guards. Circumstances were impossible to understand. But then the letter arrived, saying that she had found an ally and needed support. Now Ryugen needed to hear everything Alan knew. Before continuing, Alan asked if the room had any surveillance systems. Ryugen ensured that no, and that the site was well protected, with even the windows equipped with unidirectional mirrors. So Alan decided to show the truth instead. By activating his power, Akira instinctively pointed the gun at him, but Ryugen quickly ordered all weapons to be lowered. Before them, a portal appeared, a moon gate, summoned by Alan's abilities. He explained that the gate was a connection to another world, and that Shizuku was on the other side. Ryugen was amazed. He asked about the conditions necessary to use the gate. Alan admitted he didn't have all the answers, but what he knew was this: besides him, only inanimate objects could pass through him. Ryugen, still skeptical but intrigued, asked if he could touch the lunar gate. With Alan's permission, he reached out, your fingers touching the brilliant portal. You wondered if your daughter was really on the other side. Alan confirmed without hesitation, revealing that Shizuku now lived in a fantasy realm, leading a group of adventurers. It was too fantastic an allegation for Ryugen to accept on the face, but the very existence of the lunar gate left little room for denial. Akira, still cautious, questioned Ryugen's belief in Alan's story. Ryugen admitted that he remained skeptical because everything sounded like something from a fairy tale. Still, I had a simple request. He gave Alan a smartphone and asked him to take a picture of Shizuku as evidence. Although not familiar with the modern and elegant apparatus, Alan accepted the task. Ryugen assured Akira would take care of the instructions meanwhile. Alan was amazed by the device, which seemed quite different from the flip phones he knew. Ryugen then. He made it clear that he still doubted Alan's intentions, uncertain about how much truth or deception was in his words. But the letter was real, written in a family cipher that only they understood. Alan's delivery couldn't go unnoticed. With this, Ryugen extended a hand in thanks, asking him to convey his greetings to Shizuku. Alan accepted the gesture, quietly agreeing to the terms. Soon after, Alan returned to Asfile's fantasy kingdom and met with Shizuku while she discreetly drank her tea. He informed her of her recent encounter with her father. He did not expect Ryugen to appear personally, much less with an entire entourage arriving at the rural village where Alan lived. The frustration began to rise because it felt that the whole situation had been exaggerated, but Shizuku calmly reminded him that at the time, she was the only heir to the family. Alan put it aside, knowing she wasn't wrong. Then he took the smartphone Ryugen had given him and explained his purpose, which was to serve as proof of its existence. Shizuku took the device easily, revealing an amazing level of skill. While exploring the phone, she came across a video, a message prepared by Ryugen. Alan, observing closely, was impressed by the clarity of the images, almost as if it were in ultra-high definition. However, Shizuku was visibly moved. Tears began to appear in his eyes while watching the screen, and Alan, realizing the intimacy of the moment, felt a slight weight of guilt because he was watching. Before she could return the phone, Shizuku noticed that Alan had disappeared. She found him downstairs, interacting in a relaxed way with the other girls. He explained that it was a good time to introduce the girls to the smartphone, and with Shizuku's permission. The group quickly got excited. They insisted on taking a picture together, even pulling Shizuku for the impromptu meeting. Although surprised, she agreed. Alan gathered everyone and took a picture, capturing a rare moment of union. Then Aina approached Alan. She commented that he seemed to be adjusting to life in the brigade. Alan was not so sure because he had not yet created strong ties with everyone. Aina reassured him that there was no rush, especially because adapting to the new base took time. So she mentioned the Royal Capital Street Festival, arousing his interest. She explained that the event took place every weekend in the capital, attracting traders from various parts of the kingdom. The festival offered a wide variety of products, from day-to-day ornaments to luxurious items for the nobility. As the brigade had no plans to resume the adventures so soon, Aina encouraged him to pay a visit. That's when Alan asked if he could set up a tent of his own. When Alan mentioned he was leaving, Camille made assumptions, joking that he might be running away. Taking him by surprise, Alan admitted that part of him thought staying could make things awkward for everyone. However, the girls quickly cut that idea. None of them resented him anymore. Lazuli, in particular, took a moment to apologize for how things began, explaining that the initial hostility came from past experiences with men. Luca completed, noting that they were actually grateful for Alan's presence, especially because his captain seemed lighter and more comfortable since he arrived. Lazuli kept saying that anyone who could contribute to the brigade would be welcome. Camille agreed, mentioning that even Aina liked him. She then claimed that he saw him more as a father figure. This statement generated a mini debate, because the others argued that Alan felt more like a brother than anything else. Upon hearing their play, Alan felt calm when he realized that he was finally beginning to feel accepted. Lazuli soon redirected the conversation back to his previous task, asking what he was working on. Alan explained that he was filling out documents for the upcoming festival, planning to set up a small tent. The girls were surprised, curious what he would sell. Alan confessed he hadn't decided yet. Your current idea involved sweets turned to nobles. Still, he struggled to invent more options. The girls quickly went into brainstorming mode. Lazuli ran to the shelf and came back with one of Shizuku's favorite manga volumes. She suggested getting excited selling the books at the festival. The others were excited by the idea, excited by the possibility of having access to more volumes if Alan bought a lot. Meanwhile, Alan remained skeptical. It seemed that Lazuli's suggestion was more of a self-interest than an intelligent business strategy. He was also surprised to find out that girls could read Japanese. Still, I had to admit that entertainment products could work, but maybe it wasn't the most economical option. Although I was disappointed by the logistical concerns, the girls cheered up again when Alan said he would stock at least a few copies. That's all they needed to hear. With this resolved, they eagerly promised to pass through his booth as soon as the festival began. Later, Alan went to Japan to return the smartphone to Ryugen. Still, even while preparing for the task, I was not sure if Ryugen had believed the content he had sent. Your doubt was briefly interrupted when Akira greeted him at the door, announcing that he would act as his assistant. Her unusually cheerful humor left him so baffled that he closed the door in her face. Then Alan apologized, explaining that he just got scared. He asked her to talk to him like she used to, but she refused. Still, his calm expression was enough to reassure him. Alan then mentioned that it seemed that the president had accepted the evidence he presented. Akira confirmed that Regain was really excited. Along with the photo, the mineral luminite that Alan had delivered was confirmed as a completely unknown substance. There was no reason to doubt your story. Without delay, Akira handed him a set of documents and cards, stating that that was the promised support. Among the items were identity and residence documents, details about their living space, which was fully furnished with a PC and other essentials, as well as a black credit card with no spending limit. She then showed the balance on her new account, over 100 million yen. She had really pulled Sugar Daddy's full kit. Alan was surprised, though grateful, couldn't help but feel that it was all a little too much. Akira then presented two conditions. First, Alan would be expected to cooperate in research around the portal, as they were eager to understand his abilities and the nature of the other world. Secondly, and more importantly, he should offer full support to Shizuku. By emphasizing the second condition, its expression became sharp and inflexible, leaving Alan with no choice but to agree. From that moment on, Akira informed him that she would supervise his safety and help him in any way necessary. Alan thanked me, and so you made your own request. Soon after, the two of them left for entertainment items. Although Alan could have made the choices alone, he admitted that he was out of tune with modern Japan. Akira understood, but remained curious about his intentions to open a store. Alan then explained that he needed to build connections. At home, he depended on familiar faces, but this was his first time sailing through the capital. Conquering the nobles would stabilize your finances and give the brigade better access to information and resources. Akira found his reasoning strange, pointing out that with the resources he had, wealth was no longer a concern. Alan recognized that, but he admitted he wanted to conquer his own path. He was not content to simply receive support and wanted to build something of his own. Akira found his mentality unexpectedly sincere, and Alan was encouraged by it. Akira then asked Alan if he had plans to stock up on some items. However, before he could answer, his attention turned to a nearby window, full of letters of exchange. Intrigued, Alan paused, while Akira watched. Perplexed by his interest in them, Alan explained that in Asfile, entertainment was a rarity. Although the nobles occasionally enjoyed board games, they were often simple and uninspiring. Exchange cards, with their strategy and collectability, could look like something new. The only question was choosing the right ones, because many of the titles were unknown to him. Akira then mentioned that the group acted in various sectors, and entertainment was no exception. One of his subsidiaries even had a trade card specialization. Without hesitation, she made a call, asking for an amount of crossword equivalent to an entire deposit. Alan panicked, insisting she didn't overreact. In the end, he decided to buy only a few cards, explaining that he wanted to test the market before committing himself completely. He thanked Akira for her help, and quoted his plan to seek sweets and books next. Aware that she had her own responsibilities, she said it's okay that she didn't accompany him. But Akira refused. She insisted on staying by his side, explaining that if anything happened to him, it would shake Shizuku's heart. Alan was taken by surprise by her frankness. At that moment, you decided to trust her completely. Then, while walking through more stores, Akira showed Alan a stack of DVDs. He was surprised and felt out of date, especially because he only knew CDs. I still hadn't realized how much the world had changed. So something on the next TV caught your attention. A character from a show he recognized. He asked if it was Dream Love, the show Shizuku loved. Upon hearing him, he noticed that Akira had remained silent. She admitted it made her nostalgic. Shizuku had once invited her to watch it together, but the moment never happened. Alan, realizing he could have touched a wound, apologized quickly, but Akira reassured him, saying it was not his intention. She might have missed spending time with Shizuku, but being with her wasn't the only way to serve her. Akira then offered to buy the DVD, so Alan could present Shizuku. Soon after, she suggested consolidating all the fun, manga, drama, and more on a single tablet, if the inhabitants of Asfile yearned for joy. Offering a wide selection would be more effective than just a few options. While Akira reflected on the idea, Alan watched her silently, smiling to himself. At that moment, she looked like an older sister. When Alan returned to Asfile, the first person to greet him was Lazuli, who quickly informed him that permission for his booth at the festival had finally arrived. Without wasting time, he went to check in personally, feeling a wave of relief when he saw that everything had been approved without problems. When reviewing the permission, Lazuli leaned down and asked in a low tone about the goods he planned to sell. Alan said that the goods, specifically the manga, would be delivered on festival day, since they didn't have a place to store the shipment at the base previously. That answer clearly did not please Lazuli. She seemed genuinely upset that she couldn't get her hands on the manga right away, with a sigh and a hint of bitterness. He murmured that he hoped his tent would fail, only to gain early access to the next volume. Damn. She really chose violence. Alan found her dramatic reaction more annoying than entertaining. But he didn't insist on it. On a different subject, Alan asked when Luca and the others should arrive. Lazuli said that they would come at night, although she herself arrived a little later with Camille, because she still had some tasks to finish. As the conversation changed focus, she casually asked where Alan's booth would be set up, noting that it looked like he was targeting a more affluent audience. Alan replied that he had chosen Tent 13, located along West Main Street. That answer surprised Lazuli. She pointed out that West Main Street was no ordinary location. It was a high-standard terrain, usually reserved for the most experienced traders in the capital. Even more remarkable was its proximity to the Central District, a place known to be isolated from the rest of the city. According to Lazuli, the Central District was home to the highest-ranking nobles in the capital. It was a highly restricted area, and most commoners rarely, if ever, saw the people who lived there. However, there were rumors that some eccentric nobles occasionally escaped to experience the festival on the street. If Alan's tent was really so close to the Central District, he might end up drawing the attention of someone far above the usual clientele. Still, Lazuli pointed out that all this was just an assumption. Alan didn't seem bothered by it. In fact, Lazuli suspected that he had gone exactly into that cabin on purpose. Alan neither confirmed nor denied it, simply letting her imagination work. Suddenly, Lazuli burst into laughter, which took Alan by surprise. When he asked why, she deviated, saying that he was simply very interesting. He wasn't sure if that was a compliment or sarcasm. Confused with his reaction, Lazuli ended up saying goodbye, saying she was looking forward to the festival. As soon as she left, Alan had a persistent feeling of restlessness. But with the preparations finally completed, all that remained was to wait for the festival. Whatever happened, he thought, would happen. When the festival day finally arrived, the streets of Asfile came to life with movement and enthusiasm. Alan set up his booth, mentally believing that all preparations were made and that it was time to put his plans into practice. Alongside the main goods, he brought a small selection of books, although he intends to be selective about whom he would sell them. His main focus was chocolate, with trading cards as a test, though the true multitudes waited at night. The morning already had a good movement, composed mainly of individuals of high society. The nearby booths offered high-standard goods, but Alan believed his products could compete. I was determined to make the most of the opportunity. Over time, reality began to undermine your trust. The visitors went on and on. None of them seemed interested in their products. While the tents around were teeming with motion, his tent remained untouched. He couldn't help but wonder if his products were very specific, or if the problem was himself. Life gave him a moment of expectation versus reality. That's when Albert appeared, noticing Alan's dark expression. Albert explained he was there on business, by discovering the festival. He decided to stop by, although he didn't expect to see Alan as a merchant, with a joke about Alan's business. It looked like Albert had just showed up to mock him. Albert denied, and in a surprising turn of events, offered advice, despite being rivals in business. He pointed out that unknown products, especially food, are difficult to sell. Free samples could help, but given the clientele, most would not eat them outdoors. Alan was discouraged by it, but he knew Albert was right. Albert continued, suggesting that Alan might have more luck directing the focus to the middle class at future festivals, which took place every week, though Alan took the advice. It became clear that it bothered him. Realizing, Albert encouraged him not to give up, remembering that he was still coming in the afternoon with the public. In the business world, he said, two things mattered more: quality and trust, and Alan had both. Although Albert considered himself a merchant of little expression, and his words might not carry weight, Alan did not see it that way. Although I really believed your shop was small. Thanks for remembering that, buddy. When Albert turned to leave, Alan thanked him for his advice. But before you leave completely, Albert paused, telling Alan that he could discover something beyond the original goal he had set for himself. The day dragged itself with only a few customers passing through Alan's tent. Sales were far from impressive, and Alan decided that as soon as Luca and the others arrived, it would close early. While waiting, his thoughts returned to Albert's words. He was already making money and seeking success, so the idea of finding something beyond his goal baffled him. Suddenly, a tumult swept through the crowd. When an impressive figure entered the festival, by the traces of his royal posture and appearance, he was certainly not an ordinary citizen. The young man was no more than the heir of the Marquis de Castellano. Immediately drawing the attention of all around, Alan watched him closely, suspecting that the nobleman had come incognito to pass through the booths personally. So the rumors were true. Nobles really visited the festival. With that knowledge, Alan prepared and kept an eye out. Then, to his surprise, the young nobleman came to his booth and asked about the goods. Alan explained that he sold rare items from different regions, specialized in confectionery and recreational games. He exhibited his chocolates, highlighting his intense aroma and offering a sample to the nobleman. However, the youth's guard immediately intervened, trying to prevent tasting. The noble, imperturbable, dismissed the concern, confident that he could handle any repercussions. Alan, realizing the subtle tension, managed to realize that the guards were not satisfied. Intrigued, the noble asked more about the chocolates. Alan explained the process. Ground cocoa beans mixed with sugar and vanilla, later molded and hardened to prove his safety. Alan ate a piece and instructed the nobleman to hold him by packing, as he melted with the warmth of his body. Following Alan's advice, the nobleman experimented with chocolate, chewing thoughtfully. His silence lasted long enough to make Alan anxious. But when he finally spoke, he called it extraordinary. A quick reminder from your guard not to speak with a full mouth brought a wave of relief to Alan. The nobleman then asked for the price. Alan replied that an 8-pack cost 30,000 gold coins. Upon hearing this, the young man seemed surprised because it was cheaper than expected. Alan explained that it was a promotional launch price, what the nobleman found acceptable. Without hesitation, he bought all the stock, paying more than the amount offered to him. He insisted on paying more as a gesture of thanks for the surprise and the pleasure the chocolates gave him. Interested now in Alan's other offers, the nobleman examined the rest of the sweets, with breast, caramel, and more, and bought everything with the same enthusiasm. Alan was almost unaware of what to do in front of the growing pile of gold, while the young nobleman seemed delighted to have spent $1 million on candy alone. Then his eyes landed on the paper bags, which contained the exchange cards. Alan explained that each package contained 5 random cards, and that players needed to assemble decks of 40 cards to play, with instructions included in a booklet. The nobleman did not hesitate. He bought all the stock right away. Despite being stunned, Alan accepted, still processing the surreal experience. When opening a package, the nobleman and his guards were impressed by the detailed illustrations. One guard commented on the exceptional quality of the 3 packages, while another considered buying some for himself. Alan heard you, unbeliever. Everything he had brought was sold in a single day. He thanked the nobleman for the patronage, but the boy returned his gratitude, saying that the experience opened his eyes to something new. Before he left, he asked for Alan's name, and he introduced himself modestly. The nobleman then put something in the palm of Alan's hand and left, saying he hoped to see him again. As soon as the nobleman left, Alan looked at his hand. 2 medals. It was without a doubt the most unbelievable date of his life. Soon after, Camille and Lazuli rushed in, apologizing for the delay. Once they realized everything had already been sold, Camille panicked. Lazuli, equally shocked, commented that Alan had actually succeeded. They thought they'd arrived fast, but they'd lost everything. Camille, you were sorry you were waiting to get the next volume of your favorite manga. To their joy, Alan had kept a copy to themselves. The girls played, scolding him for not speaking before, but they were so excited they couldn't wait to read with the captain. Watching them, Alan laughed alone while they praised the manga. He realized that perhaps this bond was what Albert meant by talking about finding something beyond his goal. Later that night, while Alan was engaged in accounting, Shizuku approached him quietly. She asked why he was still working so late, leading Alan to explain that he wanted to finish organizing his records. In turn, he questioned what she was doing up at that time, suspecting that she was reading the latest volume of the manga. But Shizuku said he had just come to have a glass of water and decided to stand by him to keep him company. As the night deepened, she casually mentioned the Royal Capital Market Festival and asked if anything interesting had happened. Alan, realizing that she could have visited the festival as well, kept the details to share later. Suddenly, Alan admitted that his original goal in becoming a merchant was always simple. He just wanted to get rich. It was never a grand mission or an act of service to others. It was supposed to be his own way. For his own benefit, however, to his surprise, people continued to thank him. This reaction left him uncertain about how to feel, for he did not expect gratitude. Without saying much, Shizuku delicately delivered a small box. She called it a symbol of her appreciation. Alan was taken by surprise, not only by the present, but by the fact that Shizuku had been listening all along. When she opened the box, she found a necklace resting inside her. It was a radiant gem that shone with the full spectrum of colors, like a rainbow frozen in crystal. Shizuku explained that it was a rare gem, often used as a magic catalyst. Still, she admitted that the necklace alone could not express all her gratitude. She then reminded Alan that even if his reasons were purely personal, his actions had resulted in something real. Because of him, she managed to reconnect with her family and Akira. His motives did not change the impact he had made. Alan let out a low laugh. Her words reminded her of something Ryugen had told her once, and it was almost scary. The resemblance between the two was more than just blood, and it echoed in their thoughts. When the weather changed, Shizuku asked him to continue taking care of her father and Akira. Alan's expression got serious. He sat down, promising to do what he could. So he thanked me for the necklace, ensuring I would cherish it and take good care of it. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, King still enjoyed the brilliance of the festival, exclaiming how wonderful it had been. But before he could continue, a woman appeared after him, calling his attention for sneaking around the city again. The young nobleman tried to disguise it with a smile, delivering him a box of chocolates as a relaxed peace offering. You promised they'd see each other again tomorrow. As he walked away, she remained still, surprised and silent, the box of chocolates resting gently in his hands. Alan threw a medal in the air, uncertain if it was called a promic medal. As she swung in her hand, Camille approached him, greeting him with a casual good day. She asked for a closer look at the medal, so she wondered why he was wandering when he had training. Alan explained it was his break time, so he thought it was okay. As Camille examined the medal, her interest was visibly keen. Alan asked if she recognized it, and, to her surprise, she recognized it, so she wondered why he had it. She asked if it belonged to him, but before he could answer, Luca and Lazuli arrived, inviting them to tea. Camille lit up with the offer, while Alan couldn't help feeling a little frustrated that the conversation about the medal was interrupted. As soon as they settled in, Camille's focus quickly turned to candy on the table. Her eyes shone while she wondered what kind of treats those were. Luca explained that the cookies were a gift from Alan, a little thanks for the help the girls had given him during the street festival. While serving, Camille pointed to a particularly strange cookie and asked what animal it seemed to belong to. Alan blinked, surprised she didn't realize it was a cat. But again, in this world, cats were completely different from those he knew. Here, they were wild and aggressive, not the docile and domestic animals they were accustomed to. Still, the cookies were welcomed with joy. The girls commented on how cute they were, almost too cute to eat, and couldn't ignore how soft and warm they seemed to the touch. Alan, however, could not get rid of the feeling that he did not fully belong there. The lively energy around him just made his quiet shyness more evident. Luca soon mentioned the festival, saying that she had heard that it was a great success. Alan confirmed that it was, but he admitted that most of the credit had gone to a client who bought it all. He explained that the medals he had were delivered by that same person, which left Camille skeptical. She insisted that it could not be possible, but Alan stood firm in history. Lazuli asked to see the medals. Then Alan showed the gold and silver medals of Promica. When asked exactly what they were, Luca explained that Promica medals were used to access restricted areas. To demonstrate, she revealed her own medal of access to the dungeon. Camille then added that the Promica medals were rare and were only awarded to individuals recognized by the guild. Those medals weren't easy to get. Lazuli was especially impressed to see a Promica of gold for the first time. Luca remembered Camille had a silver Promica, and Camille explained that hers only allowed access to the school district. She could enter schools marked with the same coat of arms as the medal, based on Alan's medals. He had access to both the Royal Capital School District and the Enhide Magic Academy. As for the gold medal, it was probably in the Central District. Luca suggested that he consult the academy for confirmation, because someone probably gave him those medals as an invitation. With this, the pieces of the puzzle began to fit in for Alan. But the realization brought tension, because now he would have to meet Ray alone, the Marquise's heir. Before she could get too attached to it, Luca suggested Camille show it around, since she knew the school district well. Camille agreed, saying she owed him for the manga anyway. Just this once, she would make an exception and act as his guide. Alan accepted the offer with gratitude, feeling relieved to have someone by his side at this next stage of his journey. Later, Camille and Alan arrived at the school district. Camille explained that it was the largest district in the royal capital, opening not only several schools, but also government and research facilities. As he continued to talk, Alan quietly enjoyed having her by his side. Without wasting time, she encouraged him to move on to control. When they got there, Alan presented his Promaka medals to the guard, leaving the man visibly amazed at what he saw. In an instant, they were both allowed to pass. Camille was stunned by the view, saying she was nostalgic. Alan was equally impressed, thinking to himself that it looked like a completely different world. At that moment, he spotted a majestic building near him and asked Camille what it was. She explained that it was the Grand Cathedral of Sandrik Theological School, the only religious school in the royal capital. Alan was intrigued by the idea of a religious school, so he asked what was studied there. Camille simply replied that it was theology, but they also studied medicine, sacred magic, and healing magic. The healing magic, in particular, required special training. She also shared that their vice captain, Nana, had graduated from a religious school. Alan was surprised. While Camille continued to say that Nana could also use healing magic and sacred magic, people said her reputation was even greater than the captain's, which he found impressive. Now that Alan had thought about it, he realized he hadn't talked to the vice captain yet. Camille explained that they were both very busy. Besides, Rafine hated men, so probably Alan should keep his distance. Alan's mental image of Rafine scared him, so he made sure to keep that in mind. At that moment, Alan turned the focus to Camille, asking which school she was studying. She told me that she attended Lyosol Magic School, a low-level school of magic, made for commoners. Alan was surprised that she mentioned a low-level school, which suggested that there was a rating system. The aptitude for magic was inherited, so the nobles attended higher-class magic schools. The Enphobe Academy they were visiting today was a school for the elites. Even royalty studied there. Alan now understood that this kingdom was basically built on a system of magical castes. They refined strong bloodlines to produce more powerful magic users. And that's how Cain Riza's kingdom came to power. Right after the two of them reached their destination, Alan commented that it seemed unreal, and Camille agreed, saying it was a distant world for commoners like them. At that moment, she pointed to the horizon, saying they were almost there. Finally, they could see the Enphobe Magic Academy from afar. Alan was amazed, asking himself why everything was so huge. The school was practically a castle. Shortly thereafter, they approached the gates, and Alan told the guard that he had a Promaka medal. He asked if your date could also come in, and the guard allowed it. Then the guard took Alan's right hand and put a special bracelet on it. Alan asked what that was, and the guard explained it was a magical device intended for security measures. It was nothing personal. Camille added that she could alert the guards if he broke any rules, so she advised him to be careful. Alan wasn't impressed at all, sarcastically asking if he'd gone there just to commit crimes. Soon they entered the school grounds, and Camille was amazed. It was totally different from Liosol. She then pointed to the famous Lion's Dormitory, where the royal family had lived for generations. Alan was surprised, unable to believe that something so great was a dormitory. As they continued the walk, Camille asked who exactly they would meet. Alan explained it was Ray Castellano, the client of the street festival. At that moment, Camille suddenly stopped, making Alan look back. He called her name, but Camille just asked him to repeat his name. Alan repeated the name Ray Castellano, adding that he was the heir to the Castellano house. Camille closed her eyes, and suddenly, he ran like hell. Alan held her hand before she could escape, but she wriggled and demanded that she let her go. She asked why he was meeting a high-ranking nobleman, and Alan remembered that he had already told him that. Camille shuddered to think Castellano was one of 3 great magical families. If a common wizard tried to find them, it would be treason. Alan, on the other hand, tried to tell her she was overreacting. However, Camille remained challenging, making it clear that she would not. Suddenly, she stopped resisting and stayed quiet. She told Alan that next to the Shishi dorm, where the royal family lived, there were 3 more dormitories, each belonging to one of the 3 magical noble families. Like family Castellano was part of the Awashi dorm. That was the destination they were supposed to go to. Alan got weird, but he thanked me anyway. Just there, Camille revealed the trap. Now that she had shown her way, she asked if she could go home. Our guy just got the tutorial, but his teammate left the game indignant. However, Alan only remembered that she didn't have a promica for that place, which could get her caught if she left. Camille was desperate, still refusing to find the heir to a large family. At best, she would be meeting a knight or a low-ranking baron. Alan thought mentally that he should apologize to Camille, thinking he could do it properly later. Shortly thereafter, they arrived at the home of the Castellano family, where they were immediately received by a butler. The butler informed Alan that they were waiting for him and that they should follow him. Ray would be back soon, so they should wait for him right now. So Alan and Camille waited for Ray. Alan realized Camille was pale, but she insisted she was fine. They were both silent for a while, but Alan soon realized Camille was acting unusually. You asked her if she was sure she was okay, and Camille insisted she was. It just felt like his soul was leaving his body for a second. It almost really happened. Suddenly, the door opened, drawing their attention. They got up and went to the door, seeing Ray in the flesh. Ray smiled at Alan and said it was a long time since the festival on the street. Alan bowed and thanked for the invitation, but Ray insisted that there was no need for formalities. He's the one who called him there, so he was supposed to relax. Suddenly, a girl passed by Alan, making him goofy for a moment. She stood right next to Ray and asked who the gentleman was. Ray laughed and said, "He was your friend," which made Alan a little tense. The girl stared at Alan with her empty eyes, making him worry if he'd done something wrong. He got nervous, wondering why she was staring at him. He turned to Camille, hoping she could help him, but she was completely useless at the time. To distract the awkward weather, Alan gave Ray the gift. Ray asked what it was, and Alan explained it was a special dessert prepared for their date because of its delicate storage requirements. It was usually not sold in store. Without wasting time, Ray clapped his hands to call the butler. In a moment, the butler prepared the table for them to enjoy Alan's sweetness. Alan was impressed, seeing how quickly everything was organized. At that time, the butler asked if the candy should be cut into pieces, but Alan replied no, because it was already individually portioned. Finally, Alan revealed the candy. Ray's eyes burst with curiosity, while Alan thought Akira gave him a great idea after all. Based on Ray's reaction, Alan was sure that the fruit pie was definitely the right choice. The girl, however, was still staring at him. Alan tried to divert attention, explaining to Ray that dessert was best enjoyed cold. He suggested eating before they started talking. He gave Camille a slice of pie, but it looked like she was dying inside. After finishing the pie, Ray remembered he hadn't introduced himself yet. He started by saying that he was Ray Castellano and that he was in the first year of the elementary school division of the Enrollment Academy. He then praised Alan, saying he was right about him, The pie was the best dessert had ever had. Upon hearing this, Alan was honored that he thought of him that way. Soon after, Ray introduced his cousin, Chris Arisa, the girl from before. Realizing his silence, Ray asked Chris what was wrong. She was usually all calm and composed, but that was extreme, so Chris asked Ray to be quiet for a while. Alan was impressed, witnessing how Chris conversed casually with the heir of a Marquis family. Suddenly Ray told Chris that lying was no good, and then he mentioned she had another name. Alan seemed confused, so Ray explained that the commoners, like him and Camille, only had their own names. However, Ray was a noble person, so he had a last name too. Chris, on the other hand, had even more than that. Suddenly, Alan was impressed to hear Ray explain that he was in the presence of Chris Arisa Canraisa, the princess of this kingdom. Alan couldn't believe he was facing a real one. Chris Arisa Canraisa, if he remembered correctly, was the second princess of this country. It made him wonder why she was in a place like that. Chris' father was from a family connected to Casa Castellano. His magical power was on the same level as the Castellano family. He was called to the royal family and married royalty. In other words, despite being of a collateral line of the royal family, Chris had a high right to the throne. Ray kept saying that Chris was an awakened person of royal descent. His magical power surpassed that of past kings. Alan asked what that meant. Then Ray explained that awakened people were those that existed among the commoners, like Alan. They were people who possessed huge magical powers, regardless of their bloodline. Ray thought of an example, then looked at Alan with an expression of understanding. He referred to people like him. The man looked at Alan like he said, "You're the twist of the story." Alan was amazed, but Ray kept talking. Zen religion called the awake beings divine children chosen by God's creation. Still, Ray kept questioning what the truth really was. Awakened beings had a sensitivity far beyond that of the general public. That's why Ray wanted Chris to meet Alan this time. Alan remained silent, just realizing that everything had already been organized. From what I've heard, the princess should also be a reincarnated person. In that case, it would not be wise to speak recklessly on your own. However, he could not remain silent in dealing with the nobility. Now he wondered what he was supposed to do. Suddenly, Chris said, telling Ray that being awakened didn't make you special. She also reminded him that Alan was disturbed by those unfounded suspicions. Ray tried to argue, but Chris interrupted him, questioning how that would affect him if the rumors about Alan were true. The reincarnated people were few, and even if they were strong, they were mostly at the level of a viscount. She asked if I was wrong. But then there was an awkward silence. Finally, Ray caved and confirmed. Chris was right. Suddenly, he apologized to Alan, asking if he scared him. Alan reassured him, saying he had not frightened, but remained alert, realizing that neither looked like a child. Suddenly, Ray mentioned there was something else he wanted to discuss. Alan asked what it was. So Ray reported he'd like to buy his goods regularly in the future. Things like the street fair items and the candy they brought earlier. In return, he would support Alan and his brigade. He asked Alan what he thought, and Alan thanked him, saying he'd be delighted with it. However, that was only his position, and he still needed to consult the commander first. I hadn't told Sayonji anything yet. Ray reassured him that everything was fine, and that he would send the paperwork to the commander. With that, Ray got up and thanked Alan for the meeting. He also sent his regards to the commander. While Ray and his guards were leaving, Alan checked Camille, calling for her. Camille apologized, and then apologized for getting some fresh air. Meanwhile, Alan thought she was safe after all. Now, all that was left was Alan and Chris on the scene. Chris broke his silence and asked Alan if he had a moment. Alan said yes, mentioning he also wanted to speak to the princess. However, Chris remained silent and just looked at him. Alan got anxious, realizing how hard it was to be alone with her. Besides, she was still staring at him. Suddenly, Chris asked if she could cut off her bangs before they started talking. Despite being confused, Alan lifted his bangs, revealing his entire face. Chris stuttered, making Alan more perplexed than ever. Her eyes glowed with enthusiasm. She said he was cool, which left Alan even more confused. She started to blush, saying the more he looked, the more Alan looked like White Horse Kuhn. Alan asked who this person was, but Chris didn't answer and just asked him to lift his bangs one more time. She later explained that White Horse Kuhn was an idol who appeared in a social game called One Step. Her name was Kazu Hoshihakuba, and he was her favorite. Alan wanted to confirm that he looked like a character in a social game, but Chris made it clear that he wasn't just the countenance. He was his reincarnation. The guys were about to be isekais twice, like White Horse Q, who used to play basketball. Alan was tall, with hair like gold threads and emerald eyes. Even their voices, casualties, were identical. Suddenly, Chris melancholy remembered that it had been a long journey, and this had happened several years ago. At the time, Chris was known as Yui Sakakibara, a sophomore at the university. There was a new costume gacha and event for White Horse Kuhn. At that time, however, now she wondered what to do, because she was broke, because of the concert tickets. She needed to increase her part-time work shifts, but that would not allow her to devote herself to events. She was silent for a while. Then he declared he was leaving college. Your friend stayed calm, just saying she never changed. Besides, she was eating bean sprouts again. Her friend asked if she was okay. But Yui, with a proud face, boasted that it was a way to save money. Your friend made it clear you weren't praising. However, she gave Yui a piece of fried chicken, which she thanked for. Chris' life revolved around his favorite idol. She cut paths in daily routine, but those days were satisfactory. However, one day, that daily routine suddenly ended. So she gained wealth, power, talent, and beauty, all in exchange for the existence of White Horse Kuhn. Since then, he only existed in his heart. She cried when she thought about it, saying those days had been painful. Alan, who witnessed your outburst, just commented that it should have been difficult. He really didn't understand, but he assumed she had been through a lot. Right now, Chris said it's okay, because now she could find White Horse like that. To be sent to another world must be destiny. That scared Alan, who then reminded her that he wasn't the White Horse. But it didn't stop her, and she kept walking towards Alan suddenly. She grabbed him and threw him against the wall, telling him to stand still. As Chris approached in a frightening way, Alan was concerned that something strange had been triggered. All of a sudden, Chris grabbed him and tied his hands, so Alan begged her to stop. Remembering that a princess shouldn't do that in such places, however, Chris reassured him, saying there was no need to worry, as she could easily suppress any rumor. Princess here, doing parallel missions in Category 18. Upon hearing this, Alan told her that the situation was no fun. Even though he was a reincarnated person too, he could not free himself from his heavy arms. That made him wonder where Chris was getting all that power. Desperate, Alan screamed for help, but Chris revealed that the room was soundproof. She suddenly sat on him, saying he couldn't move either. In her past life, she had no experience, but had studied hard. She then told Alan that if he could count the stains on the ceiling, it would soon be over, so he should just stop resisting. Alan prepared for what was to come, while Chris gathered all his courage. But Before Chris could do anything, Camille suddenly entered the room. Chris was caught in the act, sitting on top of Alan while opening the buttons on his clothes. As was expected of Camille, she fainted at the same moment when she saw the scene. His soul basically pushed the ejection button. Chris immediately bowed his head in excuses, thinking that, of all people, he had lost his composure just before his idol. She couldn't believe what she had done. Alan, on the other hand, questioned her choice of word. Anyway, Alan should be grateful to Camille, who knows what could have happened if he was alone. At that moment, Alan turned to the princess, wanting to talk to her, but Chris interrupted him, insisting that he call her Sakakibara. There was no need for formalities in that situation, and that was an order, with no alternative. Alan said he understood and called her Sakakibara, then asked if she had reincarnated or been transported. From what she had said before, it seemed that she had simply been brought in suddenly. Chris replied that, in her case, it seemed more like a possession. Only Sakakibara's conscience Yui had been sent to that world, and his memories and personality merged with Chris. Alan asked if it was as if she had two separate personalities. She confirmed. It was more as if both consciences had merged, forming her present personality. In other words, the strongest otaku girl in the kingdom, that's what happened. Alan understood, but he was still surprised. I've never heard of a case like this before. Chris didn't know the details either, and that was his first time finding a wake-up call. Given her position, she couldn't just walk away. The people of that world were so beautiful that she got nervous just trying to talk to them. In the end, he gained the reputation of strange and antisocial. Alan recognized your difficulties. He then told her that he had lived there for 20 years and found it rare to find her awake in the day-to-day. Perhaps it was different in the case of adventurers, especially from the same world. Chris agreed, thinking they were really different. Meanwhile, Alan decided it would be best not to comment on Sayunji for now. At that moment, Camille, who was lying on Alan's lap, began to awaken. Chris quickly got up, saying that they had talked enough and that he was happy to have met him that day. He also promised to send a letter of support to the brigade later, not just for the exchange of goods, but because I would be happy to talk again as colleagues from another world. Alan accepted. Making Chris smile, she said it was a promise and referred to Alan as White Horse Kiyun. However, he soon realized that he had made a mistake and asked for his name. Alan introduced himself, but he said I could call him Shinjo too. Camille later regained consciousness. Alan carried her on her back, which confused her. She asked where she was, but Alan didn't answer. He was just glad she finally woke up. He asked how she felt and if something was wrong, but Camille reassured him that she was okay. She tried to remember everything that had happened. He remembered meeting Ray and the princess. Then all of a sudden the record fell. When she returned to her room, the princess was on top of Alan. The memory still horrified her. Alan, in turn, was ashamed that Camille still remembers everything. At that moment, Alan asked what exactly she was talking about. He tried to manipulate her, suggesting she passed out right after she left the room. Alan's posture was basically, if I say it with enough confidence, it becomes canonical truth. She could only have had a strange dream. Camille silently. But in the end, he believed. He was convinced there was no way that that really happened. In view of that, Alan apologized for having deceived her. He didn't want to put pressure on her to make her faint. To make up for what he had done, Alan gave Camille the next volume of Yu McCoy. Camille exploded with joy, hugging Alan while forgiving him. Alan, however, complained that she was pulling her hair. Then he said that if she was so full of energy, she could walk alone. Camille refused, stating that if she did not start reading Yu McCoy immediately, she could faint again. Alan had no choice. Camille was his benefactor after all, but that definitely didn't come cheap. Camille, however, heard his complaints and asked if he had said anything. Later, they finally returned to the guild. Alan thought things had been tough back then, but lately, they were pretty quiet. Suddenly, he was summoned by the commander and immediately went to see her. When entering his office, Seonji soon asked what the hell he had done.